Welcome to Circle Podcast, brought to you by Circle Sanctuary, one of the oldest nature spirituality churches in the United States, connecting people of nature-centered paths around the world. Join us throughout the week for a variety of shows discussing various topics, celebrating the divine in all of its forms through nature worship, rituals, education, and building bridges of community. Welcome to Urban Unwitches, a podcast to educate, inform, and expand the pagan community. Please join our Discord channel, Urban Unwitches Podcast. Follow us on TikTok at Urban Unwitches, and listen to all our past podcasts on your favorite podcasting platform. You can also join us on YouTube at Urban Unwitches. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Urban Unwitches. We always start with a little update about how we're doing, but if you've been listening, you know that the last podcast was the first half of the old craft laws. And so we are now getting into the second half, but there was something that I didn't share in the last half. Mm-hmm. Guess what I did Sunday?
I'm a Twitter. What did you do Sunday?
I spoke at an interfaith baccalaureate service.
You had mentioned you were doing that. How did it go?
I did that. It went very well. And there were things I was disappointed in. And given the fact that we've just finished talking about patriarchal society, you will understand why I was disappointed in this particular aspect of what happened. But there was a Jewish rabbi, there was an imam, there was an imam is a Muslim priest. There was a Jewish rabbi, an imam, there was a Hindu priest, there was a Sikh. Those are the four guys. Then there was me, and then there was a Presbyterian female minister. So 2 girls, 4 guys. The 4 guys came in and started slapping each other on the back and talking to each other and literally created a barrier of entry between themselves and myself and this other woman. And I was so disappointed. I really was disappointed. I was like, not only because as a woman, sometimes I feel like I'm fighting in the interfaith world multiple fronts. And one of the fronts that I'm fighting is that I'm female in a male-dominated world. And in religions where men are taught to have the power over women. And so it can be very frustrating to be in those situations. And so I did, after it was over, I literally stepped into the middle of them and introduced myself. I was like, no, you're not going to cut me off. You're just not. No, I'm here. I am equal. You should be paying me as much attention as you're paying to each other. Like, this is old boys week, right? Mm-hmm. So I did do that. That was the one thing that was disappointing. But outside of that, I think it really well. And the interesting thing that happened was the Sikh's wife was there, and she came up and said, I didn't know there was a nature-based religion in the United States. I said, you're not from here, are you? She said, no, I'm not. I said, yes, there is. And she goes, wow, can I have your card? So they got my card. I expect to be hearing from them sometime. They were very interested to learn more. I just think they had never heard of us and were fascinated that someone was standing up and talking about, because I talked about nature as as the teacher for us of what things should be and how things should order themselves, and the lessons that nature was presenting. So, and I was one of the few who, the other thing that was disappointing to me is everybody was politically correct, except for me.
Now that, for anyone who knows Dia personally, this should not come as a huge surprise, but it does feed the soul. It's like chicken soup for that part of me that lives on sarcasm.
Yeah, I did manage to stick in a comment that the nature teaches us we are in a symbiotic relationship with one another. And that means that what happens to people of color, people of other religions, people of other genders, people of sexual orientations, all of these people, what happens to them will eventually happen to us. And we must understand that. So that is, and what's funny is I got kudos from that from all the chicken shits that were didn't say anything. They were all like, "Good job, that was good." I'm like, "You could have said something. Why am I the only
Yeah.
one saying something?"
There is power in solidarity. Like we need our loud voices, but we also need support for those voices. Otherwise, they're out on
Yes,
the whippy branch.
I was very disappointed, right? And the other thing I was disappointed, and I think you will understand this, but every single male person stood up and said, honor your parents. Every single one.
Okay.
Your parents are good guys. They want what's best for you. Da, da, da. And all I could think of was that statistically speaking, that's not true. And statistically speaking, the kids sitting at this, that some of these kids, their parents are their abusers. And so you're
Hmm.
standing and unequivocally saying all parents are good parents because I'm a good parent, right? And it annoyed me.
Hmm.
Every time that came up, I was like, you guys can encourage them to be compassionate to other people of other types, but you are going to guilt them into behaving for
Hmm.
their parents. Like, I
Yeah.
think you're skewed on what's important. That was the other thing that really disappointed me because I certainly did not say anything like that at all. And interestingly, neither did the Presbyterian woman.
Well, I mean, it's about viewpoints. Like that's one of the cool things about the craft is we've got so many different viewpoints. I know the best lessons I've ever learned were from the people who were least like me. And I want to jump in here on that whole topic because it is so profoundly relevant to what we talked about last time and what we're going to go into now or today is you can honor your parents. All right. Nobody wakes up today and say, I'm going to be a bad parent. That
Yep,
if they do,
that's
they
true.
probably have other things going on. Now, they could be spectacularly bad parents. They could be
Yep.
terrible, horrible parents that do nothing but pay their baggage forward, are terribly lacking in introspection, and basically just ensure your therapist will get to have a house in the Hamptons and three cars in their garage. Like, it's a thing. I come from the South. I know that nobody in my family did what they did out of malice. That doesn't mean they didn't F me the whole way up. And I've spent my entire adult life unlearning their lessons and trauma.
Right.
Um, you can honor your parents and you can honor their baggage. You can honor their bias. You can honor
Mm-hmm.
that they are broken human beings, that
Mm-hmm.
they are doing their best with the amount of awareness they have. That in many cases is the first step in the chain of forgiveness that will unbind you from their nonsense.
Mm-hmm. And I
But
would say,
oh
but
no, yeah, the but you say because I have a feeling you're gonna actually dot dot dot
and
right on
and
that.
I would say that it is okay if your parents were horrible human beings who refuse to come to terms with the damage they've done and dig in and gaslight you
Mm,
and basically say that you're crazy. It's okay to divorce them too. Like, you don't
absolutely.
have to stay in those. And that's one of the things that I said over and over in my talk was don't stay in places where you're not fed. Move. Get out
Yep.
of those places. Don't stay in abusive places. And so I firmly believe that sometimes it's okay to say, I see you, I see your damage, I understand all that, and you don't get to damage me any further. So that's what I would say.
That's part of honoring. Like it's part of recognizing the truth. Like last time we spoke about the original crusty old dog, Gerald Gardner himself. And there is definitely the potential when we open our mouths and speak about Gerald Gardner of bothering people who idolize this man. There are
Yep.
the Gardnerian tradition is still a huge tradition. The Alexandrians
Mm-hmm.
are still a huge tradition. They're all over the place. The important thing is you can love what someone created and not love what they did. Honor a person's truth, see them for who they are, take from them the lessons that are worth having, but recognize that they are limited by the context of where they are. It's like in
Yep.
Wicca, we have different flavors of Wicca. So we have like Norse flavored practitioners. We have Mesopotamian, we have Greek, we have Irish, we have Roman, we have Egyptian, we have these cultures. But when we're studying the cultures, we're looking at them through the lens of today, through our personal lens.
Right.
And we miss a lot because of that. We do the same thing with our parents. It's like even the concept of matrons and patrons. We try
Hmm.
to we see the gods through the lens that we would see our parents, and that can be
Right.
really skewing for that energy and create a lot of problems.
Yep.
We should really focus on honoring the truth of, like, I know where Wicca came from. I have no problem with where Wicca is, and I
Right.
have no problem with where Wicca came from because I understand it. I would never do Wicca the way it was done in the very original days because
Right.
I have major problems with that today. And it's
Hmm.
allowing that two things can be true at the same time,
Yep. I
which
agree.
is super cool as far as segues and intros go. I think
Hmm.
you just served that up for a perfect spike, Dia. You're so good at this. Um, because we're starting with the burning times today, aren't we?
We sure are. So, the old craft laws, just for a quick recap, we
Mhm.
are dealing with three types of laws that have been written. One is Lady Shiva's The Book of the Law. One is Lady Galadriel's The New Book of the Craft Laws, and one is the code that was written by me in 2001. And we're comparing and contrasting these three documents and seeing what they say in light of the time they were written in. And what where we left off last time was we looked at the legitimacy of the craft laws and the code, and then the purpose for Wicca. What is the purpose of Wicca? And then we looked at where power comes within a coven, specifically maleness or femaleness, and we determined that the patriarch ruled back in the day. So that's where we got to, and we left off with the next big one, which is I called this. What did I call this? Oh wait, where there it is. Revealing the craft. Um, a word that begins with T, because we have to be careful here to not be
Mhm.
demonetized. But so it's things they did in medieval times to people they didn't like, especially if they thought they were a bad person or a heretic. And then the burning times. So we're going to try not to use the T word.
I
Um,
believe that I can help you with that, Tia. See,
okay.
in recent decades, there have been such issues. We don't want to use the T word, but we still want to use places like Gitmo to do them. So I believe they're called advanced interrogation and coercion techniques.
Oh, there you go. We're talking about advanced interrogation and coercion techniques. Yes,
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about. So
And both of
I
those things
labeled
we
this
touched on.
section as revealing the craft. So the craft is a secret, right? And then uh, advanced coercion techniques, and then burning times. And the reason this is important to understand, and we're going to talk about this first, what Kyler is going to talk about the burning times, where this mythos comes from, and that it's a mythos. Don't be shocked.
Yes. So, okay. So I'm going to try and make this concise and understandable. I'm going to fail at probably 50% of that. So y'all stay with me as best you can. So I think it is super important to understand that community identities are by their nature exclusionary. You have to understand that our group is defined as much by what it is as by what it is not. There is positive and negative space in everything. If you ever look at a picture, there are whites and blacks, there's high and low colors, there's hue, there's positive and negative space. And that is how humans work. We are creatures of oppositionality. We look at the farthest ends of the spectrum and define our boundaries and then look inside. And so, why is this important? Because that's a very highbrow concept. When you are looking at a young religious movement, they need consistency, they need a shape, they need an identity. And you define that most easily by persecution. There is a
Hmm.
wonderful book out there which really helped me to understand this in new terms. It's called The Myth of Persecution by Candida Moss. And it refers to specifically early Christian persecution and how that tradition of persecution makes it into today. So anybody who is not Christian in this country looks at the idea that Christians are being persecuted as a WTF situation. Like, how are you, the most powerful voting bloc in the US, in any way, shape, or form persecuted? Um, that concept of we've been persecuted has existed throughout. In early Wicca, there was this concept, and it is one of the reasons why secrecy is so important and why we have this selection of the laws in Sheba and Galadriel and in the code. Because I'm a child of the 90s. I know that if I came out and opened my mouth in the wrong situation, I would have doors closed. There were people, I have known these people who have worked high up in state university systems that were Wiccan or closet practitioners or pagans of some form and flavor. And if that came out, their contracts would not be renewed. They would have
Hmm.
lost their jobs. Um, that can happen anywhere. Like, at the very least, it would change perception of who they were as a person. Now, the popular Wiccan culture myth, which I will use constantly, probably enough to irritate people, is that there was a period of time known as the Burning Times. And during that time, 9 million women were put to the torch. Men, women, everybody. You had to be accused of witchcraft, usually very thinly. And there's lots of reasons why: land grab, all this other. The Burning Times did not happen in the way that the popular Wiccan culture myth would portray it. That doesn't mean there were not persecutions. We know there were. There were the Salem witch trials. There was the Bramberg's witches prison. Like, there are still historical sites. We know that people were largely, they were hung, stoned, and drowned. Just so that before everybody had an understanding of biology and anatomy, thanks to the Age of Enlightenment, in the Middle Ages and certainly through darker periods, they believed that fire couldn't hurt witches, that the infernal fires insulated them for that. So more often than not, they weren't really burned at the stake. They were hung, they were broken on the rack, lots of different things. I don't want to get us, censored, but many different implementations, usually not being burned at the stake, though. Um, the early writers of the craft in the US, Starhawk, Ray Buckland, some of these very big names, all agreed that around 9 million men and women, mostly women, were put to death during this historical period. Given where the population densities were, that would have basically beggared Europe. There wouldn't have been 9 million people at the population density of the time was a huge amount of people. It would have been a population collapse if that had happened, even spread over several centuries. So understand it didn't happen quite that way. But it is the reason why there are structures. Every traditional Wiccan group is going to have, you don't talk about who is in your group. Gardner's original setup for Gardnerian Wicca was set up almost like an insurgency, because remember, it was set up during World War II, so he was worried about Nazis taking over the British Isles. So there were only a couple of people who knew who everybody was in a coven, and they didn't, and only the summoner or the black staff, whoever, whatever that traditional group called it, that position, knew who else was in another coven. It was set up like an insurgency group. And so secrecy was really baked in the pudding. And it was because of this myth of persecution. And it very much welded people together. There are still groups out there that operate completely in secrecy, and nobody in the community know that they exist together. So that is I'm going to stop myself there. Otherwise, I will go on for an hour because I love this period of history. Thank you for listening to me drone on in my little frantic monotone. Um, but that is that snapshot that you have to be aware of contextually to truly understand this section of the laws and why it would be important.
Right. And
Sadie.
I think one of the other things to note specifically, and you touched on that at the end, is that to be a gardenerian, back in the day and even today, you have
Hmm.
to find a gardenerian, and maybe you meet them at a metaphysical store or a crystal store or someplace like that. And then you meet them a couple of times, and then they invite you for tea. And then maybe one day they invite you for dinner, and when you get there, you find out that you're going to be an initiate into this coven. And then you're made an initiate into the coven. And
Hmm.
that's your introduction to, oh, by the way, we're going to give you all these secrets now because we vetted you, and we're ready to let you come in and learn all this stuff. So a lot of, even today, especially in the South, covens still work this way. They're a little more structured now. Sometimes they have what they call secret classes, where you go and they teach you basics 101 stuff. And then at the end of that time period, they decide who they're going to invite into the group. And it's kind of voted on by the people who teach the secret class. But note that they're not in the group until after that point. And once you're in that
Hmm.
group, you can't be in any other groups. You can't associate with other groups. You can't play with other groups. You have to be in their group and only their group and nothing else. So
Hmm.
the the effect of the burning times in general is really baked into the very fabric of what we call British traditional covens,
Hmm.
because that was part of what it was. Now, that is not to say that there are not reasons to be concerned today. There certainly are. And I've said before that we used to keep a roll of who was in our group, and we have destroyed that roll um, in recent times for our group specifically. So that is an important thing to note as well. But one of the things that they talk about in this whole revealing the craft burning time section is on names. And Shiva says in 31, so be it ordained that no one shall tell anyone, not of the craft, who be of Wicca, or give any names, or where any abide, or in any way tell anything which can be betray any of us to our faces. So basically, don't tell anybody who's in the craft. Interestingly, Galadriel says this, and I wanted us to talk about this a little bit. Let each circle of light decide how it shall be known, whether by earthly name or a magical one, for each child of the Wicca knows best the safety or dangers of their homeland. So they're talking about craft laws. So let's talk about craft names. My name is not Dia. Shock. My name is actually Lydia Crabtree. Um, but Dia has been my craft name since 2001. I have been known as Dia, so much so that my husband, a week before our wedding, someone said, "Hey, Lydia," and he goes, "Who's that?" And I went, it's me. You're marrying Lydia. What do you mean, who's that? We've been dating a year. How can you not know that my name is not, it's Lydia? So that, and that is very, very true in the South, even today. Most people go by craft names. They don't go by regular names like their real names. They go by a craft name. And they give that name out when they're at big events, like big gatherings. They'll give out the craft name instead of their real name if they're worried about being out of what we call the broom closet, if you will. Um, and I think that's something that cannot be understated, that this idea of craft names really comes right out of this idea of the burning times and on all of that. It was a way to shield yourself from revelation being revealed. Clearly, that is not a problem for me. Google me. I'm all over. I can't help it. I have a big mouth. I always have. Um, what else about what these laws say um, did you find interesting when it comes to relationship of the craft or the burning times? And I'd love it if we, while you talk, I'm going to find a section where it talks about that so I can give people a kind of let them hear what it sounds like.
Okay.
Um,
So real quick, where did you leave off with the with 31? Did you read all the way through there?
I didn't read all down through 31. I really think we should read 57 um,
7. Okay. Jumping.
because that whole section in Lady Shiva's laws really gets into it. You know what I mean?
Okay. All right. So starting with number 57. And our oppressors know well, ye may not be a witch alone. So all their kin and friends be in danger of the T word. So destroy everything not necessary. If your book be found on you, 'tis clear proof against you alone. You may be engained. Keep all thoughts of the craft from your mind. If the T word, be too great to bear, say, I will confess I cannot bear this. What do you want me to say? If they try to make you talk of the brotherhood, do not. But if they try to make you speak of impossibilities such as flying through the air, consorting with the Christian devil, or sacrificing children, or eating men's flesh, to obtain relief, say, I hold an evil dream. I was beside myself. I was crazed. Not all the magistrates are bad. If there be any excuse, they may show mercy. If you have confessed aught, deny it afterwards. Say you babbled under the advanced interrogation techniques. Say you do not know what you said. If you are condemned, fear not. Fear not, the brotherhood is powerful. They will help you to escape if you stand steadfast. But if you betray aught, there is no hope for you in this life or that to come. Be sure, if steadfast you go to the pyre, drugs will reach you. You will feel naught. You but go to death and what lies beyond. Ooh, that was
So that's a
heavy.
lot, right? I
That's
mean, and part of why I
a
wanted
lot.
you to read that though is because we're not talking about, oh, they talked about the burning times. No,
Yeah.
no, they were detailed in the old craft
Mhm.
laws.
Yeah.
They were very detailed in what would happen to you. They have very active imaginations about how things would go down.
Mhm.
It was very interesting. And what I always find interesting, even more so, is that it says, Fear not, the brotherhood is powerful. And all I could think was, well, then how did you get there in the first place? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
if the brotherhood is so powerful, what are you doing being
Right.
interrogated, right? Like, what's that about? Now, I when we come to Galadriel, I want who's the new book of the law. The first thing I want to talk about is she mentions the burning times in the preface to her new book of the law, and she says, I'm looking for it. And while it was valuable in the burning times, she's saying about the book of the law. The book of the law available to most seekers. I feel it to be too archaic in its wording and perspective, and while it was valuable in the burning times, it simply does not deal with the concerns and needs of a modern day witch. That said, if you run her down to 6061, it says, in the dimly remembered dawn of ages past, the Wicca were truly free. Then in Atlantis came the age of the misuse of power, followed by the ages of persecution and suffering. Thus the people of the Wicca hid themselves and cloaked their knowledge and wove veils of secrecy and silence. And this is how the ways of Wicca have been preserved through the time of darkness. Yet much of the ways of our people were lost to the ignorance of others. Yet the cycle spirals ever on, and the age of the Earth Mother once again draws nigh. We must be strong, one with our birthright and one with our gods, if we are to bring forth the balance. Those who would harm us or attempt to enslave us, we must overcome, yet only through light and love, and never through violence or evil and chaos. And through our efforts, the time of our people will come into being once more. In the times which lie ahead, there lies much work to be done so that once more the cycles of life are drawn to the path of light and the balance achieved through the power of love. So much here that I want to talk about. First of all, It is clear that Galadriel believed there was an unbroken lineage of witchcraft and of information that had been passed down through the ages. And what do we think of this, Kyler?
Respectfully, there is no historical precedent that there is an unbroken matriarchal vegan lineage all the way through the mists of time to honored Atlantis. I am sorry.
Yes. Yes. So
Now,
clearly, this, however, was her true belief. She really
right.
believed that. So that was that's an interesting reveal there. And you have to remember that people of her time, she's in the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
then Sheba is in the 60s, 70s. So you kind of see this a desire for legitimacy, and that's what brings about this belief that it's unbroken lineage. It's not. We know that it's not. That's okay. There was a time when pagans worshiped the old gods. That's true. But that doesn't mean that the people of the heath who didn't know how to read or write kept a book of shadows and passed it down from generation to generation and generation. And we know this through not just archaeologically, we know this through the use of language and the way language was used in these writings. We know that they weren't written when they claimed to be written. I mean, there's evidence. We're not just saying this. There's evidence, absolute evidence that this is not true. So that's the other thing I wanted to bring out was that, hey, there's this belief here that's also woven into this, that there's this unbroken lineage and that people did survive the burning times, right? I always think of that shirt that says, I'm the witch, I'm the descendant of the witch you forgot to burn.
Right. I love that. I have thought about buying it multiple times, but
Yes.
I just know that my aunt will have an issue if I wear that to Easter. So there is one thing I wanted to jump in here.
Sure.
Because you just read that 61 in Galadriel's is beautiful because even if there was no unbroken vegan matriarchal lineage going all the way back to the flying cars of Atlantis, there is still wisdom. There are there is still wisdom. So like much of my knowledge of the craft comes from mining lore. I look at the folk tales, the folk songs, the that's where a lot of like really like non-Wiccan and even Wiccan practitioners get their information from. And so I have learned to extract those usable bits. So in 61, the last couple sentences, let's see. And through our efforts, the time of our people will come into being once more. In the times which lie ahead, there lies much work to be done, so that once more the cycles of life are drawn to the path of light and the balance achieved through the power of love. That's a message I need today.
Mm-hmm.
That's a message I think we all need today. We
Mm-hmm.
have work ahead of us. The world is a difficult place. So even though these are some archaic laws, some truths they carry past generations, they carry past decades and even centuries. So they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just know your context. And I think that's really important because honestly, it had been a while since I'd read that one. And when you read it, I was like, oh, my heart, I feel it. I have the feels.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And one of the things that I would say is in the code I write, do not open yourself up for persecution by those who do not know, understand, or tolerate something outside their beliefs. Guard yourself from your own tongue. If you expose others to persecution, remember the same will come back to you threefold. We beseech the gods that it is swiftly, so you ever link the action with the result. So I
Mm.
have a couple of things to say about this. And the first is this: I have a firm belief from being a Christian that what I was taught as a Christian was that if we hide what we do, then it's wrong. It's a sin. That's, you go back to the child's things, this little light of mine, hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine, right? That is what they're saying. They're saying that what they're doing, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. And so I do think in some cases it's dangerous for people to do that. I have chosen to be really out of the broom closet. And
Mhm.
and once you've made that decision, there is a level of trust you have to put in the gods. And I had a legal battle happen where I was actually accused of being a Wiccan. Like, isn't it true that you're a Wiccan? I mean, I'm on the stand and I'm being told, ask this. And I can clearly remember thinking, I have a choice right here, right now. I can lie and say no, or I can say yes and explain what it is. And so I said, yes, that's true. Wicca is, and I started to explain. He cut me off. My lawyer, good lawyer, said she gets a right to explain what she means, right? You can't just bring up a term and then assume that the court understands what that means. So she has a right to explain that. So I ended up giving an impromptu 101 class on Wicca in this legal proceeding. And the person on the other side just happened to be of the craft too. And they chose not to, um, they chose to lie, bottom
Hmm.
line. And they lost magnificently. I mean, and I was shocked. I can remember leaving that courtroom going, they denied the gods. Like, holy crap. Like,
Yeah.
it's one thing to be someone who is in the broom closet and trying to preserve your likelihood. But it is another thing to say that you're going to speak the truth. And then when you're confronted with the truth, flat out lie and say it's
Hmm.
not true.
Yep.
Um, and it was a lesson to me that if you are going to be out of the broom closet, own it. And I don't mean get a 7-inch pinnacle and put it on your shoulder. I mean, I mean, be willing to say, yes, I am Wiccan. I am a witch. I am pagan. I am these things. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not, raising bad entities to come get you. Although I'll never forget right before I walked into that courtroom, the lawyer turned to me and said, "Are you going to bewitch me if we lose?" And I said, "No, I would never." And he was like, "Oh, okay, that's good." It's like, and
Hey,
then
at
I
least
turned
they
to him and
got to
said,
cover
"We're,
bases.
yeah." I was like, "Just for the record, we're not going to lose," and we didn't lose.
Yeah.
So, but I craft that loss based on the fact that the person standing
Hmm.
against me denied the gods, and I was literally in physical shock over that. Just I will never forget.
Hmm.
I spent 30 minutes going, they denied the gods. But like I felt like I had fallen into some alternate reality because I couldn't believe they denied the gods. So my lesson here is if you're gonna be loud and proud, be loud and proud. Don't be ashamed. Don't don't hide it. And if you're exposed, say there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing, right? It's
Hmm.
private. It's for me. I'm not going to I'm not going to take it. And what you're going to find is people will accept you in the manner in which you present yourself. So if you present yourself like I'm doing something wrong, then they're going to present the idea that you're doing something wrong. But if you go to the baccalaureate service and stand up and say, "Hello, my name is Reverend Dia, and I am representing earth-centric religions that some of you may know as paganism, Wicca, or witchcraft." Just put it out there. There's, you know, there is there is some liability to be had, but I feel like in the long run, it is that kind of being out there, being in interfaith circles, being who you are, not being ashamed, that in the end, that's what's going to win the day for us.
Hmm.
That in the long run is going to be the kind of thing that wins the day. Um, just my, I'll get off my soapbox now.
It, it's a good soapbox, and it puts you at just the right height. Like, I mean, that's the thing is in the craft. I remember my very first. She was a friend who never realized how much she taught me, but I count her as my first teacher. Her name was Poppy, and
Mm-hmm.
Poppy was so accidentally wise. I adored her, and she told me, "Do not lie. It is better to keep your mouth shut so that you do not perjure yourself.
Hmm.
Because that's the thing, whether you are on the stand in a court of law or whether you're talking to your friends or whether you're having a conversation with your boss, if you lie, you are removing your own strength. You are binding yourself through your word to an untruth. And if you
Hmm.
find yourself in a position, plead the fifth. You don't have to answer anyone's questions. Now, there may be a consequence to not answering a question, but if you cannot dance around it, don't lie. I mean, and that's the thing. My mom once told me, if you can't talk about it by light of day, don't do it by light of night. And she did not realize that what she was doing was opening the door to me for me to overshare for the rest of my life, which she has regretted many, many times since then. But she was often the northern star that helped me chart a very erratic and confusing path in life. But yeah, be honest, because if you lie, it does impinge on you. Things don't work out. It was explained to me that like if you lie, every time you lie invites your magic to turn on you. And there's a lot of different ways that can manifest, but I've felt it in my heart every day.
Yep. I think Lady Galadriel actually addresses this, and I labeled this particular law, "Don't lie about being in the craft, hedge." And this is what she says: no one of the Wicca may do anything which will endanger the craft, nor bring any of the Wicca into conflict with the law of the land or with any persecutors. And the reason I named it hedge is because it reminded me of an exercise Dick Sells used to give me. Dick used to say, I heard you're a witch. And I had to come up with an explanation that deflected the truth without lying. So he would say, I heard that you were a witch. And finally, one day I turned to him and said, they usually use the B word, but if you want to use witch too, that's fine.
Yeah.
It was my hedge, right? That's the hedge. I actually had a time to practice this. I'm on the interwebs as Crafty Dia, CRAFTY DIA. I took this name because of its play on words, because crafty could mean of the old religion, or it can also mean crafty, like I am crafty, I crochet, so I'm crafty. And I actually had an employer one time go, someone said that, you do the witchcraft. And I said, really? And they said, yeah. Well, your name is Crafty Dia. And I went, yeah, I crochet. And she went, oh, well, that makes sense. And that was the end of the conversation. I
Hmm.
knew in that moment, if I had revealed myself in total to her, I would not have had a job anymore.
Yeah.
And I needed that job. So I hedged, right? I didn't lie. I hedged. I have
Hmm.
never lied about being in the craft. I have hedged quite a bit. On
Hmm.
many occasion, I have hedged.
Right.
But when faced with the direct question, I am not going to lie about that,
Yep.
especially in a court of law. Not going to happen. So after we talked about ad nauseum, the revealing of the craft and advanced techniques, they do go into some other things that are interesting. And I was going to just ask you what caught your eye, because when I say they're in Sheba's, there's 162 laws. In Galadriel's, there's only 88.
Hmm.
And in mine, there's 106. So there's a lot, and we're not going to be able to cover it all. So I thought I would ask you, Kyler, what you really picked out and thought was interesting between the three of these uh, documents.
So one thing that's really important for me is settling disputes.
Mm,
When I first, so I grew up in an area where I was very isolated. So having a community was super important. I looked and looked and looked and looked for a community. I looked for coven. I looked for even just friends that I could have conversations with this about, or conversations on the craft, right? Even just the philosophy of it. And eventually I realized that if I was going to have a community, it was because I was going to build one.
mhm,
And I got good at that. For a long time, I didn't count myself as a Wiccan, and I didn't, for many reasons, didn't follow the craft laws because didn't identify as a Wiccan, and most of them were pretty archaic and in some cases awful. And after I had a community that was beset with problems, I began to realize that there was a huge issue in Wicca and modern neo-paganism. The average group lasted, now mind you, these numbers are about 20 years old. The average group lasted 3 to 5 years at most and then disbanded for whatever reason. Now, at the time, I had never met a coven that lasted longer than that. Since then, I've been part of a tradition that has been around for 50 years now. So I know that you can overcome those issues. But in the time of the interwebs, we have groups, communities, covens, and then we have national, interstate, international communications that so often lead to witch wars. Um,
Mhm.
the concept of the witch war, oh my God, I cannot put into words how melodramatic the concept of a witch war is for me. I have no energy for it. I have a really hard time even paying attention to it. And it's honestly one of the things that actually kept me from moving into like the more out there digital sphere, like the internet and social media and all of that. Like I will look at witch talk and I will take a step back and I will, there are groups that I've been a part of that I'm largely silent on Facebook before I left Facebook and all of that, because if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, they're there. There's this hyper reactivity in today's age where you have to be exactly the right, or there's nothing but differences. And so, disputes in the craft, how you run covens, while it's
Mhm.
so pedantic and even almost administrative, as somebody who's run a group before, this really got my attention. So, yeah.
Yeah, and and the interesting thing to me is that if you compare Sheba and Galadriel, when it comes to this, they basically have um, the same advice, which is try to work it out, and if you can't, then the person who's disagreeing should leave.
Hmm.
Which leads to the understanding that you should never stay in a place where you are under the stress of emotional, mental, physical type of advanced techniques.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so so I think that's one thing that's really true. Now mine um, actually gave a step by step, and it led to what was known as the Kaka ritual. And what I said is they had to go out into a field and shovel caca, or into a horse stable and shovel caca together, so that they would understand that that is the manifestation of their disagreement. And once they agreed, then they would burn some caca so they would understand that it affects everybody. And
Hmm.
then they could, they could be in the group again and not have issue. Now, what I have learned in my older, wiser, I hope, years is just go talk to the person. Dang.
Hmm.
Like one of the things that I remember the most about settling disputes among um, Wiccans, and I have actually proposed this to people before. I've never been taken up on it, but Starhawk and I believe it was M. Maka Nightmare had a disagreement, and so they went to mediation together.
Hmm.
And they mediated their disagreement over a course of mediations. And I'll never forget being told that and thinking, yes, that's what we should do. Like, go to counseling. If you're in a coven and it's a tight group and you're having a problem with one person, don't just sit with that. Confront them, talk to them, deal with them. The other thing that is important about what they talk about in the disputes in the craft comes out of Sheba's uh, laws. And she says, if there be any quarrels or disputes among the brethren, the high priestess shall straightly convene the elders and inquire into the matter. And there they shall hear both sides, first alone, then together. And then they shall decide justly, not favoring one side over the other, ever recognizing there be people who can never agree to work under others. But at the same time, there must be some people who cannot rule justly. To those whoever must be chief, there is one answer: void the coven, disband the coven, or seek another one, or make a coven of your own, taking with you those who will go. To those who cannot rule justly, the answer be: those who cannot bear your rule will leave you, for none may come to meetings, and those with whom they are at variance. So, and and either cannot agree, get hence from the craft, for the craft must ever survive. That's not the one I wanted. Do you know the one I want?
Uh, I'm looking now because there are a lot. There's a
There are a
lot.
lot of them.
This
That
document
was,
is nearly 4,000 words, just so that everyone
yeah,
knows, and
just,
they are
yeah, it's a
just,
lot of information. Maybe it's in 93.
if there be any quarrels, I'm at 93 now.
No, it's
Elders.
not 90. Maybe it's 110. 110. Nope. 119. And it's a seeker, suspicions. We're looking. Basically, and I can't find it, but I know that we have it. There is one part of the old laws that say, um, don't ever take your disagreement with the brethren to the police or the magistrate. They use
Mhm.
term
Yeah.
magistrate, um, to the magistrates. And the problem with this is that it has raised an entire group of people who believe it's wrong to inform on people who do very bad things. And that has created a consent culture
Hmm.
in paganism that newbies should be aware of.
Yeah.
And it's because there's this code that's been given of silence. You don't take your dispute out. And I in my book I write about a group that where there was some grooming going on, and with a 14-year-old, and they came to me and said, well, what are we going to do? We can't go to the police. And I
Yeah.
went, go to the police? What are you talking about? Like, yes, go to the police.
Hmm.
And that has been something we've had to struggle and deal with, but it comes right out of this idea that the craft must police itself, because there's a fear if the police get involved, then the police will police us. And what happens is we all know in a state of silence, the people who suffer are the victims.
Hmm.
That's all. It just allows people to do bad things and get away with it. So there, for me, that's one of the other things that's really important. And I actually, in my code, I actually write in there, go to the police. Like, don't be stupid. Do that. Don't allow someone, because what happens in these isolated groups, especially when I wrote the code originally, is perpetrators would go from one group to another, to another, to another. So they would perpetrate in one group. And because these groups were isolated and didn't talk to each other, they would just move and then perpetrate in another group. And then when that group kicked them out, they would go and perpetrate in another group. So you basically are enabling perpetrators to do that, right? So I feel like, there's a whole uh, podcast about the consent culture and
Hmm.
paganism and Wicca, and how that has changed. That, in fact, I was part of a book called Consent Culture in Paganism. And you can look that up. It's an anthology. It's really good. And it talks about these issues specifically that kind of come out of the code. Some of them come right out of this idea that we had to not involve the police. And I think that's to our detriment. And it certainly is to the detriment of those who end up victimized, in my
Absolutely.
opinion.
So
Um,
just so you know, while you were talking, I did find I think the
oh,
section you were looking for. So it's 127. 'Tis the old law and the most important of all laws, that no one may do anything which will endanger any of the craft or bring them into contact with the law of the land or any of our persecutors. In any disputes between the brethren, no one may invoke any laws but those of the craft, or any tribunal but that of the priestess, priest, and elders, and may the curse of the goddess be on any who do so.
Right.
So, kind of going along with what you said, I have been part of several groups over time, and I was part of a group where during the Me Too movement, there was a lot of attention paid on this. There were several
Hmm.
kind of older name pagans who were caught up in the wave of that. One of
Hmm.
these individuals was arrested, and there was evidence, and they are in jail because it also involved minors. It was a whole lot of things. But this
Yep.
was a person who was well known to be a predator. They were well known to be a problem. And there was a whole structure to kind of keep them away from people who were vulnerable. That's the word I was looking for. During this time, the leadership of a community that I was a part of got embroiled in the discussion. They were not responsible for any of this, to the best of my knowledge, but they weighed in on it, and it was so violent that it actually changed the leadership of that community. Somebody who had been in a position of leadership for 4, almost 5 decades at this point, actually stepped down.
Yeah.
It was a huge thing, and I think that this consent culture has been around for so long that it becomes a habit, but we have had a very big culture shift in the
Yes.
last 10 to 15 years. And it was
Hmm.
very necessary because there is the concept of power with, not power
Or
over.
over.
And hierarchical systems like this, secret systems or systems of secrecy, promote power over, not power with. Now, I understand that there is power in secrets, and part of the
Hmm.
craft is rooted in secrecy. You don't work a casting, you don't, however you choose to use the term, you don't do anything magical and then go around talking about it. That's like the fourth part of the pyramid, to know, to will, to dare, and then to keep your mouth shut. But at no point should you condone predation or um the hunting of people in any way, shape, or form. Like that's something to be
Hmm.
aware
Yep. And there are two more points I want to make. I know this is going to run long. I don't care.
of.
But because they're important points. One of the things that I like to bring up when I talk about the craft is the idea that there was a strong homophobia kind of rampant within it. And it's based a lot on what these laws have to say. Um, Sheba talks about this in 153 through 156, and she says, "It hath been found that practicing the art does cause of fondness between aspirant and tutor, and it is the cause of better results if this be so. Fond could also be an act, but if there any reason this be undesirable, it can easily be avoided by both persons from the outset, firmly resolving in their minds that if any such ensure, it shall be that of a brother and sister or parent and child. So don't do it. And it is for this reason that a man may be taught by a woman and a woman by a man, and that a woman and a man should never attempt these practices together. And may all the curses of the mighty ones be on any one who makes such an attempt." So that's not a little bit. Like, that's pretty specific
Yeah.
of a thing. And it was this type of attitude that I was taught about from Renata, who was one of our members for years and years and years. Renee, 50 years ago, before she got married, she went and asked to be handfasted, which is not legal. But she wanted to be handfasted with her partner that she ended up with for 50 years. And they wouldn't handfast her because it was unnatural for a woman and a woman to be together. It was against the laws of nature. And this was part of these Brit trads and these traditional groups had this belief for years, which is how we end up with things like the radical fairies. Um, they there are spaces, spiritual spaces for gay men that have been cultivated because of this type of behavior, not just in our religion, but in many religions. But our religion, did come right out and say it. And one of the things that disappointed me again with Galadriel is she just ignores this. She doesn't talk about it. She doesn't bring it up. There's no information about it. It's just not there. I said that let any gender teach any gender that they feel called, reminding the students that balance is important and giving the students equal time to work with the opposite sex. In other words, let everybody work with everybody. Teachers should
Mhm.
not engage students in giggity relationships for pleasure's sake. However, if a student teacher in the course of their relationship discover a bond beyond parent and child, they're free to handfast and move the job of teacher to a shared relationship with another priest or priestess so the student degrees are never questioned. In other words, the idea of legitimacy again was paramount as I was taught by Richard Sells. So he would say if if that happened, then you had to make sure that the training got finished by someone else so that it was legitimate. Um, and he would also say that you should only take on married couples. Um, and by married couples, he meant male and female. He was part of the old guard and didn't really talk about homosexual relationships or lesbian relationships. Um, but I also wrote, remember, ultimately, we are many paths in one, and each must find their place among the sun. The path you will walk is your own, and your achievements are gained and lost by your responsibility within your own life. In other words, like, live and let live, right? Freely take, freely give. That's what I'm
Mhm.
basically saying. Um, but we have a rule in our group that if you're a high priest or high priestess, there's no giggity with anybody in the group. I hope you understand what giggity means. Just for the record.
Thank you so much, Family Guy. You've given so much to our culture.
Yeah. So giggity. So yeah, there's no giggity in our group from the high priest and high priestess. And again, that goes back to this general idea of empowerment of, not power over,
Mhm.
right? If I'm in a position of power, do the people below me actually have the right to choose, or are they being coerced into choosing because I have the power? That's the question. And I think that that's something to really think about. And again, that's a whole in and of itself thing. But I wanted to bring that up. What do you think
Mhm.
about this particular segment in history?
I think, as a gay man, as an opinionated gay man who is priesthood, um, I was very fortunate in when I became an initiate of a Brit trad that it was more progressive. Um, I was very fortunate. I got to have conversations around this topic with Lady Tamara James. She is the founder of the Odyssean tradition and the WCC in Canada, and she has very strong feelings about this because some of her most favorite people are the gays. Her perspective was that those who are of the LGBTQI plus, they are able to bring a perspective to the world that is so much more rich and dynamic than just the hard binary. Now, yes, in order to produce people, man and woman come together, that is a biological imperative. That being said, throughout nature, there is homosexual relationships, there is intersex, there are so many different variations, and that's biology. Anybody who's ever taken sixth grade biology, at least at a reputable school system, knows that there is more than just man and woman. There's everything in between. So I got to be in a community that encouraged that. One of the finest ritualists I've ever seen was a priestess, or I'm sorry, priestess, a priest by the name of Estes, who, with nothing prepared, with nothing written, could walk into a group of 50 people and produce the most amazing off the cuff ritual that connected everyone. All he had to do was be there and he could create that group experience. And then I had, for very, very many years, a close, wonderful friend who was gender fluid. And this person led ritual as both male and female presenting. And again, one of the finest ritualists I've ever seen in my life was able to play in concepts and emotions that unified a community. The idea that the only the only righteous, the only true expression of love is the binary male and female
Mhm.
is the most rigidly superficial and nonsensical notion I think I've ever heard.
Mhm.
It's just not reality. And to say that that is the natural order means you know very little about nature and basic biology. Um, yes, I feel a little passionately about it, but the many groups have taken steps to distance themselves from it. Even my own group, the WCC when I was a part of it, their traditional wine blessing was very heteronormative, and it
Mhm.
caused problems for many years. There were large portions of the community who wanted to move past it, and it is kept in place to honor where we came from, but it is not required for any ritual. So, like, whenever we were, when we do public rituals and everything, there are many people who absolutely will not use the heteronormative language because it's just not indicative of our community.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yep.
it's this is definitely a snapshot in time, and I think it's really interesting for those of us who are different to see how much we've changed in such a short
Mhm.
amount of time, especially now when some of that change is being threatened. Like, I'm a kid of the 90s. I remember thinking in the late 90s, early 2000s, I would probably be in my 80s or 90s before we ever got gay marriage. And then, hello, what was it, 2012? Like, it's boom, there we
Mhm.
are. It happened so much faster. So yeah, it's lots of feelings on the topic. It's one of
Yeah.
those that we could really get into, because I think it speaks to the very nature of what it is to be human and our
Yep.
human experience within the craft and within the natural world.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think when you're talking about a religion that is a fertility religion,
Hmm.
these kinds of conversations are going to happen. I mean, we are a fertility religion. That is the
Hmm.
idea that you have uh, things that create. I like to say, uh, and maleness is in us all, and femaleness is in us all. Um, the idea that we are both and all in one. So that's why we can create by ourselves because we have both that power within us. Um, that's kind of how we've dealt with it in our group. But I think also it is a very indicative of the time. The only other thing I wanted to mention was that Galadriel introduces something that affected me specifically. And when I came across it again this time, I was reminded that in 2001, I was a hale and hearty person. I was very well. I was not sick. I was not disabled. But in at 70, she says, none shall enter a circle that has sickness or an ailment which may be passed on to the lady's other children, for to do so causes harm to yourself as well as to the others of the circle. Rather should the healers go unto the sick one, and through the love of the gods they shall be made well and whole once more again. I have problems with this one particularly. It's not that she's saying don't pass around the flu. It's that the idea of wellness as either you're well or you're not. That's where I have a problem. And that's a very ableist view, right? People who are healthy all the time think that that's what it is. Either you're sick or you're not sick. People who have chronic disability understand that every day is there's a spectrum of illness that you're on. And and again, she is a child of the time she wrote this in, right? This was very much the view of how it was written. And I was really disappointed in myself that I did not address this in the code. If I were ever to rewrite it, I would definitely address this in the code. But one of the things that I did say was that the laws of the mundane world still apply within the circle. Gravity, disease, and natural consequences will continue to apply in ritual. You know, if you giggity, the circle doesn't protect you from STDs. I'm just saying
Mm,
it doesn't, you know.
yeah.
And that was
You
the
mean
only
there's
thing
not
I had to say about that at all.
you mean there's not some magical Beltane night
No,
effect where, only
no, at
positive
all.
things happen?
I used to run big gatherings, and I always arranged for a uh, giggity fairy to carry around little packets. And they had a wand made out of those packets, and they would run around with a big basket of packets and hand them out. Always, the giggity fairy would be there, because I so heartily believed in this, right? And usually it was a fairy. It was a gay, fabulously gay man who would dress up in wings and the whole nine yards. It was
Oh
great.
my God. The I officially am going to file an application to change my craft name to the Giggity Fairy. Um, I have found a new calling. I have to leave our podcast and go forth into the land and make things right as the Giggity Fairy. Um,
Yes, the giggity fairy. We had those,
so if
and
you if
that's
you ever go out clubbing and you maybe drank a little bit too much and you wake up and you don't quite remember how you got into the bed you got into and you reach under the pillow and there is a condom, the Giggity Fairy has blessed you and he
that's
is he is
right.
doing the work of the land.
That is absolutely right. Well, we have come really past our time, but
Mhm,
the only other thing, most of this, I'm going to run through the different sections that just so you have an understanding of how much breadth there is to these laws. So some of the ones we didn't, there's a whole section on general advice for all three. There's a whole section on vows and oaths for two of them. There's a section on Wicca, several sections on Wicca is a secret. There's several sections on how to treat people in the craft. And interestingly, the one that I thought was really interesting is you can't do any negative magic unless you're trying to get a coven stud, and then all bets are off. Did you read that? It's true.
what number?
It's
Where is that? What?
it's on Shiva's 2526, and Galadriel said the same thing in 49 and 71. Um,
Uh, I have
71
seen
says on and in Galadriel 71 says it has been judged lawful that if any of the craft need a house or land and none will sell, to incline someone mind so as to be willing to sell, provide it harms none, and the full price is paid without haggling. But it comes
what?
right out of Sheba said the same thing. She was like, don't do it and harm none is in here many times. But and
Right.
harm none unless it has to do with land, and then all bets are off.
So
I
you
just thought that
heard
was
it here,
odd.
guys. Yeah, apparently the laws of return are somehow suspended when it comes to real estate. We're not sure how, but that it's in the books now. Like,
Well, and what I found, and I actually wrote this as what an interesting aside. An interesting aside is that the Grove of the Unicorn, Ravenwood, Oak Spring Grove, all of these are big groups within the Atlanta area. All of them own coven studs. All of them. They have a coven stud that the group supports with their donations. So um, that's that. Establishing new covens and running new covens, keeping a book of shadows, um, working tools, money in the craft, which we didn't cover, but that was a
Mhm.
really good one too. Disputes in the craft, on spells and spell working, a lot of harm none happens. Harm none, and don't lie about being in the craft. Hedge, that's a whole section. Don't prove the craft. And what they mean by that is don't go out and say, I'm of the craft and I'm going to make you sorry. On love and giggity, That's in there. On teachers, priests, and priestesses, on teaching and binary positions in the craft, on punishing covenanters. Both Sheba and Galadriel had large sections about that.
Hmm.
Um, I did not. I left that out. Disability discrimination, on seekers in general, and then on running. I added a section called on running large festivals because I ran large festivals. So I added a section about that. So that's just some of the things that we didn't cover because the breadth of this is so big. If you've
Yeah.
enjoyed this talk and want us to go back and cover some of those, you can reach us at urbanunwitches@gmail.com, or you can join us on Discord to continue the conversation at Urban Unwitches Podcast. And we will be happy to continue this conversation with you there. Um,
Hmm. Oh, don't
but
forget about
that
TikTok. We're on the Talk
we're on
too.
we're on the TikTok, Urban
Yeah.
Unwitches. We are on the TikTok. I forgot
Hmm.
about that. We
Yep.
we put out
You made me do
little
one, so
snippets of upcoming. Yeah, we put out little snippets of upcoming of podcasts, so you can see kind of what we're getting into. So yeah, so look for that as well. This is a heavy, heavy, heavy topic.
it is. It's so linear. It's a bunch of rules, and I don't know that there is a heavier topic in the sense of just a slog to get through. So for those of you who've listened to both this podcast and the previous episode, thank you so much for bearing with us. This is dry. This is like crossing the Sahara while eating saltine crackers and no water in the water skin dry. So we thank you for hanging on with us because it is important for all that it's very dry. And there are lots of topics that are juicy and salacious and easier to digest, but these are important. It's important to know where we came from. So thank you so much for bearing with us and being all the way through the end there. And
Absolutely. Do you
Miss
have
Dia,
anything for Resiliency Corner?
that's exactly what I was about to ask. Yeah, I've got one for this. Because I found myself doing this the other day. I have recently been challenged in my patience. I have a well of patience, and occasionally there is a drought, and the water table in my well drops significantly. And I have recently experienced these arid conditions. And when I open my mouth, as you may have noticed, I'm a bit sarcastic and I'm a bit mouthy. Yes, I'm mouthy. Um, like a pit bull puppy am I mouthy. And I have been challenged recently to control my mouth with someone who is very grasping at my attention and very needy with my attention and is just vexing on a variety of levels. And so I remembered a trick that I used to do whenever I was learning to control my temper, because I come from people who have expansive tempers. Um, I stand in front of a mirror and I say the thing that I want to say. And this is kind of an old therapy technique. But then I ask myself, who am I talking to? I look in the mirror and I say,
Mm,
who are you talking to? Am I
mm,
talking to the person in front of me? Am I having a true conversation with this person that is irritating me? Have I been honest? Have I clearly stated or have I avoided? Because avoidance is like the number one technique in the South, avoidance and passive aggression. Have
hmm
I been clear and straightforward? And in that way, have I been authentic? And I ask myself, who am I talking to? Am I talking to this person? Or am I talking to my issues, my baggage, my schmutz that I have brought forward into every conversation and every relationship I will have going forward in my life? And it
hmm
helps me really put into perspective so that I'm engaging in each moment with authenticity and with presence. And in times like these, it doesn't matter what the rest of the world is doing, it matters what you are doing. You can't control the rest of the world, but you are responsible for you. And in that, you have control. And there is a measure of calm and balance that comes from that.
I agree. I like that. And we didn't get to talk about money in the craft, so I'm going to say in Resiliency Corner, I want you to think about whether or not you should pay for your craft tools
Mm.
and think about how much you'd be willing to pay. think about if those tools represented your commitment to the craft, then how much are you willing to pay for your craft tools? And who are you willing to get them from? So just think about the tools, meditate on the different tools that are available that you can use and what they each may have to teach you about getting through life. That might be a good way to occupy your mind with something a little more positive. I always sign off with "Have a magical day." How are you signing off, Kyler?
Mm, that's a
He
really good
doesn't
question. I had not
know.
thought about that. You stumped me, Dia.
I stumped him.
Two and a half hours of podcast, and this is what stumps me. Oh. Um,
After listening back to all of our podcasts, you could just say something about donkeys, and because evidently that's a recurring theme.
So my mother saw that little blurb you put on TikTok. I'm not sure how she found it, but she's like, "Oh, Kyler, son, baby, you remember red ears? That is so sweet. You love that old." Well, she called him the old B word because he wasn't a rascable old donkey. She's like, "You just adored him," and I'm like, "Oh, nostalgia." Um, every moment of every day, you get to redefine yourself as the wonderful, vibrant, fabulous, wounded, loving, sorrowful, everything in between creature you are. So today I will sign off with be fabulous, be fierce, be loving, be yourself. Blessed be.
Blessed be so motivated. Thank you for listening to Urban Unwitches. Please reach co-host Kyler Petrie and Rev Dia at urbanunwitches@gmail.com. That's urbanunwitches@gmail.com to suggest topics for shows or comment on past episodes. Please join our Discord channel, Urban Unwitches Podcast. Follow us on TikTok at Urban Unwitches. Follow us on YouTube at Urban Unwitches to watch all episodes. And listen to all our past podcasts on your favorite podcasting platform. Rev Dia is a witch for hire as an officiant, life coach, astrologer, geomancer, and medium, and can be reached at www.revdia.net. See you next time. Thank you for joining us on the Circle Podcast, presented by Circle Sanctuary, and produced for all who follow nature-centered paths. Join us throughout the week for various programming connecting with the community around the world. Please don't forget to watch for updates on the Circle Sanctuary website at www.circlesanctuary.org. Follow us on Facebook at Facebook/Circle Podcasts. We can also be found on your favorite podcast hosting sites, such as iTunes, Spotify, and others. Until next time, many blessings.